Welcome to Go Get Great, the podcast for aspiring entrepreneurs and ambitious small business owners. I'm your host, Brittany, owner of Brittany Miller Socials and mother of 3. Go Get Great is all about helping you make life and business work together. You'll learn about the fumbles that helped get me and my guests to where we are today so you don't have to make them. So come join the journey with Go Get Great. Hello, and good morning. So welcome back to part 2 of how to start up and manage your podcast. I am so excited to be back again today. This is obviously something that I'm super excited and passionate about. My podcast has been one of my favorite things to do in my business since I got started with it this year. So although I am far from a podcasting expert, I am always happy to share what it is that I'm doing and how I'm doing it. And as always, I am super excited to have Grayson back, keeping me on time track and also sharing his expert opinion on kind of how things go. So as we mentioned at the end of the last episode, what we're going to be talking about today is kind of once you've got your podcast started, how do you keep it going? How do you be consistent? How do you find guests if you're having guests on? How do you manage it? How do you prepare for episodes? What does working with a podcast manager look like if you want to go that route, or how you can do the editing yourself? If you want to monetize your podcast, how all of that works. So we're going to try and dive deep into all of this. These are very big, very hefty topics. So we will see what we can do in a way that doesn't take forever, but also gives you the information that you need to know. So I'm going to start with finding guests, because I know for me, that was one of the really big things that was important to me. I wanted to have guests on my podcast, and I thought it was going to be this huge uphill struggle to find them. But you know what? That actually hasn't been the case. People want to be on your podcast because it is a way for them to promote their business and introduce it to new audiences, the same way it is as an opportunity for you to promote your business. It's basically like a mutually beneficial relationship that you are entering into with someone that is going to speak on your podcast. So some of the best ways to actually find guests are to look in your immediate circle. So a lot of the people that were on my podcast in the beginning were friends that I had met at networking events. At one point in time, I had said that I was going to bring my clients onto the podcast, or people that I've worked with in the past. And it's not that I don't want to, it's just that I've actually been overwhelmed by the number of people that have wanted to be on my podcast. And I just haven't had a chance to invite any of my clients on yet. So stay tuned for that.
Basically everybody wants to be on a podcast.
Yeah.
Like everybody I talk to, oh, can I be on Brittany's podcast? I'm like, well, you don't know, you're not a mother, like you're a 21-year-old man without a girlfriend and you don't own a business. I don't know what you want. Oh, I just want to be on a podcast.
It is like a super hot thing right now. Everyone's starting podcasts. Everyone wants to be on podcasts. It's just such a fun way to engage and connect and kind of create community and promote your business. So definitely will be super easy to have people on your podcast if you want to do that. So aside from looking within your immediate circle of people, there are hundreds of different Facebook groups. You can literally just go on Facebook and type in "be a podcast" or podcasting groups or podcast guests, and you can join a bunch of groups and literally just post in there, introduce yourself. Hey, I'm Brittany. I am a social media expert. I'm also a mom. These are the 3 topics that I am really passionate and about talking about and an expert in. Is anyone looking for guests? Like, yeah, I'd love to have you on my podcast. And if you are a podcast host looking for guests, again, so many people looking to be on podcasts right now. It is so easy. So Facebook groups are a great way to do that. If you're in any sort of like community or anything like that, then lean into that as well. So, I did a free email, it was a paid email marketing challenge a couple months ago from Amy Porterfield, connected with a bunch of people there. I'm also in the Monarch community. So a lot of those women are going to be guests on my podcast in the next little while. So I have not had a shortage of people that want to be on my podcast, which is fantastic. So
you also want to make sure you talk to these people before you agree to be on a podcast with them.
Pre-vet them.
Yeah. Because you know how sometimes you can get people that are not like, kind of the vibe you're looking for on your podcast.
Because it is all about your brand. You want to make sure that the episodes you publish are reflective of you and what you've put out there in your show description about what you're going to talk about.
And also you want to make sure they know what they're talking about in the first place.
So. That too. You want them to be an expert. That's kind of the point. So the flip side of that is, you have all these people that want to be on your podcast, but then how do you manage it? So I am in a fortunate position where I can just use my podcast as an extension of my business. So I have a CRM in place. I use Dubsado. You don't need to. You're probably not going to want to pay for it. It's, about $400 US a year. So it is a bit of a commitment. You're not going to want to do this if you are just exclusively a podcaster. Dubsado is also very similar to Honeybooks. So you might be using something like that already. But any system that basically has the ability to create a questionnaire or a form. So if you are just getting started and you want to manage this, do something free and use Google Forms. And you're going to
Or
want
if you already have a website
yeah.
for something like you have a business, you can put a form right on there.
Yeah, absolutely. So you could do something like that as well. And really what you need, my application is quite comprehensive. And if you guys want me to post an example somewhere, I can link to it in the show notes. Let's say we'll do that. But you want to collect enough information that if you actually do interview this person on your podcast, then when the episode goes live, you have all the information you need. So you need like their name and their social media handles and a way to contact them. I also ask my guests to give me a bio of themselves and let me know if they have any free or paid resources that they want to talk about with my audience. Totally okay with them promoting their business. I also collect headshots from them so that I can create cover art for the episode. So you just want to think through all of the different pieces that you need. And by think through, I mean you just want to go and copy my application because I've been doing this for a few months now and I haven't run into any issues with me not having the info that I need in it. So that is probably one of the first things that I would set up if you are planning on being a podcast that regularly has guests on, like myself. On the note of that, though, there is one thing that I do want to say. As a personal brand business, it is important for me to be adding value to my audience, but it is also really important for me that my audience is getting to know me as a person. And I think we mentioned this in the last episode in part 1. But oftentimes, when you are interviewing a guest on your podcast, it can be very difficult to get a word in edgewise. No offense to any of my guests. I know that you're all super excited and passionate about the topics you talk about. But if you want people to get to know you because you want to use your podcast as a marketing tool, and you totally can, it will grow your business. It will take time, but it will happen. Then you need to make sure that your audience is getting to know you. So within my podcast, I've been trying to find a nice balance of having guests on because I love the connection and the expertise they bring to the episode, but also still having episodes where my audience get to know me and I'm still able to provide the value in what it is that I do. So you'll notice I've got a couple solo episodes talking about, social media and maybe email marketing. I don't know whether we put that one out yet. So different things like that. So it is a balance, but in terms of finding guests, definitely have an application in there as a way to kind of manage and also remind you of who's put their hand up and said, you know what? Yeah, I would really love to do that when you're ready. I also try and batch record my episodes. So I try not to do too many at one time. Again, we talked about this in the last one, but I like to try and record them all on the same day. It is much easier for me. One of the things that I like to try and do in my podcast is have good audio quality. And Grayson mentioned a little bit of that before. Try and be in a smaller room, lots of fabric around if possible. You want to minimize the echo. And for me, the biggest things that cause noise echoing in my house are my children and my dog. So I have to record on days where they are not home so that we really do get some good quality audio for the podcast. So I schedule specific days where I record my podcast. And then after I am done recording, I upload them to the cloud and then they are good to go for Grayson to finish the editing. So he'll talk about the editing process in a little bit.
It's also nice when you're not rushing every single week to like force
Yes.
yourself to get a video out. Like I think I'm kind of doing that now anyways because I don't really have time to edit multiple at once, but at least I know that I can leave this one for next weekend or I can edit two if I had time. So if you were like doing really basic edits, you could probably just edit all three of them and then you're not rushing it like, oh no, I need to get this done for Friday, Thursday, Tuesday, like whatever day you need, right?
Mm-hmm. The other thing to note is if you're literally just recording and publishing within like the 7-day turnaround, if your guest happens to be sick that day and you can't record, what are you going to publish that week?
Mm-hmm.
So it's good to have a couple kind of lined up in advance. So, like I said, I always like to have a few. And then if my schedule needs to be adjusted, because I've had to reschedule my podcast interviews before, I'm not in a panic phase because I don't know what I'm posting. And with podcasting, much like social media, consistency is key. People are getting used to kind of a consistent schedule and they want to know that, for me, Tuesdays at 6 a.m., my episodes go live and they can listen to it on their way into work or while they're doing their workout on Tuesday morning. So picking a schedule and sticking with it is something that's really going to help the credibility of your podcast. So give yourself the peace of mind to have that in place. Applications, interviewing guests, how I prep for my episodes is kind of a big thing. So because I have guests, I can't really like write scripts for my podcast, but I do still try and do my research and my homework before I interview each guest. So I look at their bio that they submit. I read through what it is that they want to talk about on the episode, what they're an expert in. I usually also try and meet and pre-vet my guests. So we'll have just like a quick 15-minute coffee chat. Hey, this is who I am. This is who you are. And I give them a little bit of a background on my podcast. This is what I talk about. I like a very conversational style. It's not going to be interview based. This is my general demographic. Do you have any particular skills or expertise in this area? I should have a general idea about the answer to that already, but I always like to ask if there's something they missed in their initial application. And then I've created, I want to say about a half a dozen, I call them filler questions. So, if the conversation doesn't seem to be moving as smoothly, you kind of get to a point where you're like, what next? Because I like to have a conversational style. I have some of these like pre-vetted questions that I've told my guests that I may ask during the podcast, and I'll throw one of those in to kind of keep the conversation rolling. And once I confirm a guest, I will, like I said, go on and do a little bit of homework, check out their social media, go on their website and see if there's anything from there that I'm curious about. Because if I look at their website and I was like, oh, that's so cool. I didn't know you did this. Or what does this really mean? If I'm asking that question, chances are you guys, as listeners, are too. So I like to kind of include that in my episode prep work. And I actually send an email to my guests giving them, some tips about how to have good quality audio on their end, even if they don't have a microphone, and what they can expect from recording with me. So that is an additional step. You don't have to do that. You don't have to do a coffee chat. You don't have to send a prep email out. But I have got positive feedback from my guests that they really appreciated kind of having that touch point and an expectation coming into the recording process, because a lot of the people that I've recorded with, like myself, had never been on a podcast. I
It's
don't know if
also
I talked about that in my last episode, but my podcast was literally trial by fire. I had never even been a guest on someone's podcast before I launched mine. So, no, you do not need prior experience to do this.
it's also good to get a conversation with them because there
Mm-hmm.
are so many podcasts I've listened to where they bring this guest on, and the first time they have ever talked to them is when they're in that episode, and you
Mm-hmm.
can tell it's super awkward because they're like kind of just throwing a question out and then they don't really know how to converse with this person. So I think it's really good if you at least get like a little bit in so you kind of get a flow of how to talk to this person. You know a little bit about them so you're not sitting there awkwardly
Mm-hmm.
throwing all of your questions at them and then they're more comfortable with sharing more information too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And then in the last episode, once you've kind of done your prep work, we've talked about the recording process. So I'm not going to dive too deeply into that, but I will say that I record all of my audio and video with my guests on Zoom for my podcast. So that's how we do all that. And like I said, then once that's ready to go, we just give it off to Grayson. So did you want to briefly touch on some of your things now before I dive into monetizing and promoting?
Yeah. So I can talk about a little bit of editing and kind of how to deal with like your equipment too. So when you're dealing with people in the same room, if you're recording on two different microphones, you're going to have to fiddle with the audio to make sure you are not recording both people in both microphones the entire time because that is an absolute nightmare to try to edit out uh and it's going to sound really bad and you'll get like this weird echo where it doesn't really make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
So you're definitely gonna have to mess with that. You can try using things like noise gates and stuff like that if you want to look up how they work and how you can use them. But that's a good way of keeping that out. Um, when you're using, uh,
So when you work with a podcast manager, I didn't actually know this was a thing. Grayson was just helping me because I don't have the time and capacity in my schedule to do all of this stuff. But basically, what happens is, like I mentioned, once you hit record on the episode, you share the episode with your podcast manager. And then, Grayson, why don't you walk people through what it is that you do once you have the file from your clients?
Okay, yeah. So, well, first thing I would do is probably like have some kind of a preliminary, see what you want, how much you want cut out here, like what your vibe kind of is, so I'm not like just kind of doing the exact same thing on every single
Mm-hmm.
episode. But I'll get the file. If we haven't worked together, I'm gonna give you like a 5 minute clip of kind of the editing I do. Maybe it'll be the beginning where your intros and everything, but I'm gonna be like dropping in the intro, doing whatever edits you want. Like you could be getting every single and ah taken out, or usually we'll talk about like, for instance, you don't want every single and ah taken out, basically,
Mm-hmm.
because if it does get really annoying if somebody is saying like all the time. Like I went down to like the fair and then we like went on this like ride and it was kind of like, and it gets very bad there. But a
Cringeworthy.
lot of people will go like, in kind of this like pattern. So you
Mm-hmm.
get a like here and an there and a there, and it sounds way more natural, and you don't have to worry about editing those out too much. Usually I'll take out every because they almost always break a sentence, but you aren't taking out everything here. So
Mm-hmm.
you kind of get a good flow in.
So it's client preference. Some clients will
Yeah.
just have Grayson drop in the intro and outro and call it a day. They want a very authentic podcast, no edits to it. And that's okay. And others like me are a little bit pickier when it comes to stuff like that. And we do want Grayson to kind of strip some of that stuff out.
Mhm.
And he can do a lot of other fancy features that are a little bit above my tech expertise, but like noise reduction and like volume equalizing.
Yeah, it's basically, what you're looking for. Obviously, there would be like more of a cost associated with adding more stuff to it, but you can get by with very little editing if you really wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm just going to go through and edit it, and then you're going to get either your file back and you're going to post it, or I'm going to post it, which is obviously another like cost associated with, more work. But either I'll post it or you'll post it, and we kind of talk about titles and descriptions and stuff like that, whether or not I'm going to be writing them or they're going to be writing them. And
Often show notes are included in that too. So those are the time codes that, well, I call them show notes. I don't know if that's the
yeah, so
technical
you
term,
can add time codes.
but the time codes that are associated with it, because that will break your episode into chapters as well. So when people are listening to your podcast, whether it's on Spotify or YouTube, that's where you see the breaks in the lines that are associated with a specific
Hmm.
time. So I really like that, especially if I'm going back to listen to an episode again where I'm looking for something specific,
Yeah. And
or if,
Spotify has a good feature where it's like an actual like button you can click on too.
yeah,
I
which
didn't
is
know it
really nice.
existed before, but
So if there's like something and you don't want to listen to the whole episode, but you want to check out just a specific section of it, then you can click on that in the time code section underneath and it'll take you right to it. So that's something that Grayson would do in the editing process as well, if that's something that you would like.
it's also a lot of communication back and forth. Like you can kind of choose how much communication you're looking for. If you trust me to do, or any really manager, podcast manager, if you trust them to do the work, you could just give them the audio file and then have them post it and have them the description and not say anything to them. And it could be good. But obviously communication is key with stuff like this. Um, but yeah, that's basically it.
Mm-hmm. So it can be really kind of wash your hands of it. You just record and Grayson will do the rest, or you can be very heavily involved in the process and do all of your own editing. So there are options for you, whether or not you're someone that wants to learn how to do this and you really enjoy that, or whether you're just like super excited to have the conversations and then just want it to be done in the background for you. Very similar to social media, honestly. Uh, so I just kind of wanted to talk about that because I didn't know that there were options for that. And when I started my podcast, before I talked to Grayson, like I mentioned, I thought that I was going to have to do all this. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is so overwhelming. Like, I don't have time for this. Like, how is this going to happen? And honestly, it's been a breeze. Grayson manages all of it. So having a podcast manager is definitely something that I would recommend if you are kind of looking to do this more continuously. And I've talked before about long form content, and I feel like that's kind of the natural transition here. So let's dive into that, kind of the how do you market your podcast now that you have it? So I'm not sure when this episode's going to go up, but in my mind of Brittany Crazy Land, I would love to put together kind of like a marketing checklist cheat sheet book for you with some of the information that I'm talking about here. So don't hold me to it. But if you're interested in the resource, send me a message. And when I do put it together, I will make sure that I send it to you. But from your podcast episode, you have done a fantastic amount of work putting in the energy to find your guests, get it recorded, get it edited or sent off to your manager, published and ready to go. So you really want to leverage this as much as you can for your business. So in the world of marketing, we talk about this long form content. So what that means is longer pieces of things that you are creating. So whether that's a vlog or a podcast or an actual blog that you're doing on a regular weekly basis, you are then basically going to cut and paste specific elements of that to use to promote your business and then drive more traffic back to your long form content. So it ties into your email marketing strategy, it ties into your social media strategy, and it can also tie into the financial strategy of your business through monetization. So we'll talk about monetization last. But from this, I kind of want to share, and this is in an ideal landscape because Brittany has not had time to do this, but what I plan to do with my podcast and the direction that I want to go, I post my episodes every Tuesday. So you could actually create a social media post for your podcast for every day of the week using that one podcast you create. I just blew your mind. I know it. So again, my ideal world, what I would do is on Monday, I would post the bio of my podcast guest. So this would be like hey, Grayson's going to be on the podcast this week. He is an expert in this area. This is going to be a one sentence summary of what we were talking about. Episode comes up tomorrow. Make sure you're ready for it. Then on Tuesday, you can actually post the bio on Sunday if you wanted to. Mm-hmm. And then the day before, we'll say bio on Sunday. Monday's post is going to be a teaser clip. So I'm going to take, a 15 to 30 second audio or video clip, if you're doing video, out of the podcast episode that we did and be like, here you go. This is coming out tomorrow. Get ready for it. It's a great episode. And then on Tuesday, when the episode comes out, you can do, again, the same thing. Take another clip from it. Be like, hey, this episode launched today. This is something that we're talking about. Are you interested in this? Make sure you go and listen to the full form version of it. So that's Tuesday. Wednesday, what I recommend doing is posting a quote. So take a favorite quote from your episode. Maybe it's something funny that they said. Maybe it's a really key piece of information. Put it in a static image, throw it up on social media and be like, oh, I really like this from the episode. If you haven't listened to it yet, make sure you go and get it. So that's Wednesday. Thursday, you're going to take another teaser from it. So all you've done is pulled 3 30-second clips from your episode in, let's say, a 20-minute episode.
Which is actually really easy too, because you might think, oh, I don't want to take 3 from the beginning, but nobody knows where they are, right? So you kind of just grab whatever grabs your attention and then you have them already.
Mm-hmm. So you put another teaser clip up and be like, hey, if you haven't listened to this, this is still here. Go and listen to it. This is where it's available. What day of the week was that?
Wednesday.
Was that?
Thursday.
That was Thursday. Okay, that's what I thought. So Friday, you're going to be like, hey, in case you still haven't paid attention, here are the 3 or 5, depending on your choice. These are the 3 key topics, key takeaways of the episode, because usually it's either an entertaining or an educational podcast. My podcasts are educational. I'll be like, these are the 3 top tips that I took away from this episode. And you just put it in a carousel and you put it up and you're good to go. And then Saturday, this can be a little bit more of a free-for-all. I usually would recommend that you take and you recycle old content. So you go back to an old episode of your podcast, one that's been posted a couple weeks ago, and be like, hey, in case you missed it, here's something that we talked about in podcast episode 4. And we just released podcast episode 14 or something. So you go back and highlight something that you've done before.
Or you could take a break.
Or you could okay, but I said a social media post for every day of the week. Okay. So Yeah, so there you go. 7 social media posts from one podcast episode that you're going to create, regardless of whether you talk about it on social media or not. So take advantage of this long form content, build it into your email marketing strategy, send an email out each week going, hey, this is the podcast, this is the guest, this is what we talked about, this is what you're going to learn. There you go. So that's social media, email marketing, that's your podcast. That's a very quick overview. There's so much more that you can do with this. I love it because it's collaborative. So, especially when you have guests on your podcast, you want to tag your guests in all of the posts that you're doing because then they're going to share it with their audience. And then that exposes your podcast to more people, new listeners, new potential clients for your business. Like I said before, win win. I absolutely love this. Another thing that I'm not currently doing for my podcast yet, but it's on my very soon to do list. Grayson hates these lists. He knows how long they are.
They're like from like here
and then you
to like here.
Then you keep scrolling.
Yeah, and then you go and add another one over here.
But one of the things that I would like to do to maximize my podcast as much as absolutely possible is then I want to follow up with my guests with a summary email. Be like, hey, thank you so much. Here's the cover art for our episode with your picture in it. Here are some of the teaser clips that I pulled out of the episode. These are my social media links. This is how you can use the episode that you've already created to promote my business.
Just make it
the underlying, but to promote their business, to make it very easy for them.
As easy as possible for them so they do as little work as possible.
And be like, here's a few ways you can promote it. Create social media posts. Use the audio clips as real teasers. You can use some of the static images or the carousels that I've created for it. Also, it's really great to make yourself sound like an expert on your website. So maybe you want to put a featured in section as a banner on your homepage or have it as a dedicated section somewhere else in your episode. Here's the cover art for my podcast because I have my own actual cover art and then the cover art for each of the guests. So I would send both and be like, here's the cover art for my podcast. You're welcome to list that you are a guest on my podcast on your website. So again, helping them promote their business, helping me promote mine. So that is definitely something that I'm going to be doing soon, as soon as I have 5 minutes to sit down and write out the email. So there are just so many different ways that you can use your podcast to grow your business. And within that, if you are hosting a podcast, you are extremely qualified to be a guest on somebody else's podcast.
Also, you can just use your podcast as like almost put it on your resume. You know what I mean? Hey, if you want to see the type of person I am, drop that in there. And then you'll see that you're like an actual person who like can talk about stuff.
And there are so many different places that you can promote your podcast. And that's a whole separate conversation. I will not go down that rabbit hole right now. But anytime you have a guest on your podcast that is also a podcast host, be like, hey, I would love to be on your podcast. Do you think it would be a fit? Talk about it that way. Make sure you're putting it out there. And anytime you're a guest on someone else's podcast, even if they haven't been on yours, you can, mention it, hey, if you'd like to learn more about me, make sure you check out my podcast. You are dropping this name like it's your freaking business because guess what? It is. And it's free content for people to consume. It's like, I cannot say enough how amazing this is as an opportunity for your business to grow your business.
And not to mention it's fun too.
Yes.
It's like,
love it.
It's a lot better than creating 12 lead magnets and like
I like that aspect of my business too, but it's definitely a lot
but this
harder.
Is definitely easier. You sit down and basically talk to some people, you know what I mean? It probably takes a lot to manage it. I don't have to deal with that part so much, but
I don't know, I think the editing's worse, so it's kind of a nice balance.
Well, it depends how much work you're putting into it.
Okay, so we've talked about managing, we've talked about promoting. Now we want to talk about monetizing because that's everybody's goal. So one of the easiest ways to start monetizing your podcast, talk about your services in your podcast. You'd be amazed how many times I forget to do that. And in listening to the recording later, I was like, shit, I should have done XYZ, or I've got this free lead magnet. Why didn't I say that? So make sure anytime you're recording an episode or anytime you're guesting on someone else's podcast, you're promoting your free resources because that's going to get people on your email list. And from your email list, you can then sell them your product. So it's a bit of a long-term strategy here, but definitely worth doing. That's a fantastic way. You can also do, I don't really know what the word is for them, but basically advertisements. So
sponsors.
Well, no, advertisements for your own business. So within your podcast. So like, let's say I have a course that I'm launching in August. Then starting in June, if I've got it figured out, it'd be like, hey, did you know I've got this upcoming thing? And I'll pre-record a 10 or 15-second little promotion
That's the word.
for the course that I've got coming up. And I'll just plop it in my podcast episodes in various spots that I'm doing. That's a great way to do it too.
It's like an ad, but it's for yourself.
Yeah. And it doesn't cost you any money because it's your podcast. So that's a great way for you to monetize your podcast as well. And then the other two pieces is get sponsors. So that's probably not something that's going to happen if you're just starting out with your podcast. I don't have any sponsors for mine. I'm probably not going to go after any until I've published, I don't know, maybe somewhere between 52 and 100. And I say 52 because there are 52 weeks in a year. So that means that I have been consistent with it enough for a year that when I approach someone, they know that I'm going to keep that consistency up and they're not just giving me money that they'll never see a return from. Or you have a fantastic listener count. Like if you're regularly getting like 1,000 listeners for your podcast, for starters, kudos to you because I am not. But then you're kind of at a place where you'd be like, hey, this is how many people I reach. Are you interested in promoting your business in this way? I'll do a shout out in my episodes. If you sponsor me, here's the amount. So go into those kind of meetings with a dollar amount in mind and an expectation of what that dollar amount is going to be associated with. So it's likely absolutely going to be a shout out in the podcast, but it may also be that there is a section in each of the captions for the descriptions of those podcasts saying, you know, episode sponsored by blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, you want to make sure you know,
the
like,
descriptions.
You want to know, like, the terms and service. Like, if you're doing like a YouTube thing, you need to, at the start of your episode, say who you're sponsored by. And then in the middle, you need to say that the episode is sponsored by like this person. It like has to be like that. And Spotify may or may not have something similar. So you just want to make sure you know what you're doing with those too.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely want to cover, you know, dot your I's and cross your T's in that case.
And like contracts too with the people you're working with.
Yes, absolutely. But you can definitely monetize your podcast in that way. And much like influencing, monetizing is usually tied to your listener rate, from what I understand. Usually you charge a flat rate per episode, but it's kind of based on the number of listeners that you have. Then
I believe YouTube and Spotify now do like Spotify and YouTube like ads. So you can like put ads on your video that aren't from a specific company that's sponsoring you, but they're just running ads on Spotify and YouTube.
Kind of like Google AdSense for your website.
Yeah, it's like, you know, when you're watching YouTube and it's like, oh, an ad is going to play in 2 seconds and then it plays the ad and then it goes back to your video. It's like that now on Spotify. I haven't really looked into that one though, so you might want to do some research on that one.
But you can monetize your podcast on YouTube. So YouTube actually has a monetization program. I currently do not qualify for the YouTube monetization program, but I've looked into it. So you have to have 1,000 followers on your account and you have to have a certain amount of watch time of either short form or long form content in a specific time period. So short form content, I think it's a quarter, and long form content is X number of watch hours in a year. So if you're regularly posting 20, 30, 40-minute podcast episodes, once you hit that 1,000 subscriber mark, you're probably pretty much guaranteed to be raking in. Well, I won't say raking in because I don't know that you're going to make something. A lot. You're going to be earning something from your view count. You'll hit the view count pretty quickly. So YouTube Shorts are super popular right now. They're a great way to start growing your podcasting
Everybody
audience.
Wants to compete with TikTok.
Yeah, they do. And, you know, remember back to that social media strategy that I was talking about, all of those audio teaser clips that you're pulling out, short form video content. Those are your Instagram and your TikTok reels and your YouTube Shorts. So put them up on all of your platforms because you're already creating the content. And then within that, you're going to take your podcast episodes and you're either going to put the video, like the audio up with a graphic to make it a video for YouTube that you can put up to be part of the watch hours, or you're going to actually record, like we are, video for your podcast and put the actual video up. So not only is it a great way for your viewers and your listeners to interact and see you in a different way, but you can add, you know, pop-ups here if you have visuals that you need them to see. And it's a great way for them to just kind of, I don't know how to say it other than interact with you more, like I did a second ago, because, you know, they get the visual expressions and my very erratic hand movements that are all over the place here. I'm gonna hit Grayson in the face accidentally in a minute. And then, like I said, once you hit that monetization threshold, watch hours and 1,000 subscribers, then you actually start to earn money every time someone watches or listens to your podcast on YouTube. So if you're going, I don't want to say if you're going to the trouble because you're creating a podcast because you enjoy it, but if you're doing it, do all of it. And then you're going to get to a place soon where you actually start to see money coming in the door from your podcast. So you start for nothing and then start earning money from it. That sounds like a pretty sweet deal to me because I love doing it and I'm going to do it even if I'm not making money from it.
And the other thing is, like, you have to know that people are not going to just come and watch your podcast because it exists. You have to, like, unless you've got like some crazy like search engine optimization going on, you're going to have to be putting it out everywhere. So people know that it exists. So that's what Brittany's talking about with your social media post every single day of the week, basically. You've got to just get it out so much before you start getting people coming. And you want like Spotify to recommend it too. So you're going to need the people there for it to even try to do that.
I just to be clear, I'm not saying that you have to post on social media 7 days a week, but you could
it's
if
just
you wanted to.
If you're looking for getting numbers, you're going to have to like be going really like putting it out there.
Absolutely. One other thing I didn't mention, and this is technically in the getting guests section, but also kind of in the promotional section, is there are a lot of different websites where you can actually go to promote your podcast and like look for guests. So I looked into one a little while ago called Podmatch, and it's like a monthly membership fee. It's kind of like a dating website, like a dating app for podcasters. So you put in kind of the criteria that you're looking for, either to be a guest on someone's podcast or to have guests on yours, and they'll match you and you have that preliminary coffee chat with them. And then I think they actually pay you if you actually publish episodes with people that you met on their system. So, it's not a bad investment. I think it was like $5 or $10 a month or something. It didn't seem like a lot, but I, like I said, have no trouble getting guests for my podcast. So I am not in a place where I want to pay for that service right now.
That's something you might want to look into if your podcast is like way more niche and there aren't that many people that can be talking about whatever it is on your podcast.
Absolutely. I mean, pretty much everyone that I know is a mom and entrepreneur, so we can check a lot of boxes quite easily with that. Again, for our dog training example, if you want to bring other experts in, probably going to be harder to find. So yeah, absolutely. Those are some great options. Let me just double check my little thing here. So we talked about social media management, finding guests, managing and prep work. We also talked about monetizing, working with a podcast manager. A little bit about editing.
We can talk about the time frames.
Time frames. Yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah. So I'll just talk about like the editing front and maybe like kind of working on your podcast. So you're obviously going to have setup every single time you go to record. It's nice if you're recording in the same spot, you have like a dedicated space. You just leave all your podcasting equipment basically set up. But if you're working with something like a non-audio interface, like a soundboard or something, you're going to have to like set that up every single time. But a probably 15-minute setup time on stuff like that. You're probably going to have to spend a good few hours if you've never worked with any of this stuff, just sitting there and messing with it and pre-recording some audio before episodes just to make sure all of your audio is coming out properly and the right volume and you're getting all of it. So that could depending on like your technical literacy for stuff like that, it could take a long time. If you've never used stuff before, you're probably going to take days just setting stuff up and checking it and messing with settings. And then the actual editing. So this does depend on how long.
The actual recording too. Assume that if you're recording a 45-minute podcast episode, it's probably going to actually take a little over an hour by the time you have small talk with your guest on either end of it.
Yeah, because Brittany's podcast almost always have like a little bit at the start where she's not talking about whatever, and then a little bit at the end where she's not talking about what's actually in the episode. But then you're looking at you don't want to actually go too much longer. Like when you actually start your conversation, you don't really want to go too much over, because some people say, well, if you want a 45-minute episode, record for an hour. You really like probably only want to record for 50 minutes, and then maybe you cut out that 5 minutes. Maybe you don't. It really depends on how off topic you really make it.
kind of like driving. You go faster, but you really don't seem to get there any sooner. You don't
Yeah.
really cut much out, even
Yeah,
though you're
there's not,
cutting stuff out.
it really depends. Sometimes you could go way off topic and you kind of just have to keep an eye on that. But with Brittany's podcast, almost never does that happen. Um,
What? We're off topic all the time.
uh, but then for editing, so it really depends on like what you're planning on doing. If you're going to be cutting words out, like just assume you are going to spend at least double the length of your podcast. And it's even longer if you're going to be taking notes for show notes or pulling out,
Timestamps.
yeah, pulling out like teaser clips and stuff like that and
That
putting
too.
timestamps. All that stuff is going to take way longer than you think it is going to. Oh, I'll just pull a 20 seconds out. It's like pulling 20 seconds out, putting it into a new file, exporting that. You now have to like put it somewhere else so you know where it is. And it kind of cuts your like flow up a bit. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, I would just, if you're doing like the full taking out your filler words, pulling teaser clips, writing your show notes basically there, you're going to be sitting there for at maybe triple the episode length. Um, but
So for a 45-minute episode, you're looking at
yeah, like
almost
almost,
3 hours of editing.
yeah, like 2.5 hours of editing. Um, you could go faster if you're like really quick with it, but
Or not doing
sometimes,
that many edits.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. I would just assume double for if you're just doing normal editing.
Mm-hmm.
But also with pulling teaser clips, I'm not going to pull them, every 5 minutes in the episode. I'm probably going to pull five of them. And then if there's 20 minutes left of the episode, I'm probably not pulling any more because unless it's some really interesting clip where I think it's way better than anything else, there's
Mm-hmm.
no point. People aren't going to know which things you pulled or if it's more interesting than anything else in your episode.
Unless they actually listen to it,
Yeah.
which again, then the teaser clips work because they're listening to it.
And then with video, you also have to know that if you're exporting the video, it's going to take like, if you have a 45-minute episode, it's going to take half an hour just to export it.
Oh, man, and then it takes forever to render in YouTube before
Yeah.
you can actually
If you're
upload it.
putting it in YouTube, you're going to sit there for another 45 minutes while it figures out, uploads it, and then puts in HD and then does all of the checks it does for like copyright and like explicit content and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So you're looking at like a good like 6 hours of editing if you're doing video. And then if it's just audio, probably as long as your podcast is about 45 minutes, probably around 2 to 3 hours there. So you just got to
So
give yourself this time. And I get to work on it like straight in a row too. So
which is the benefit of hiring a podcast manager. Just
yeah.
throwing it out there. Also, going to note that I don't think you mentioned this, but in some of your podcast manager packages, you actually pull out the teaser clips for the client. So the client
Yeah.
can give you, hey, we talked about this at this time. Can you pull a clip out from it? Or
Or I could,
Grayson
yeah,
can just
choose.
go through and choose some things that he found interesting as a listener, which usually or something that other people would find interesting for as well. So that's something that he does. He pulls all of my clips out for me, and then I get the audio file, and then I have social media templates that I use for all of this. So at some point, I will have a template for the bio and the quotes, and I've got a few different teaser clip images that I use for the reels that I put up. So you can template your way through a lot of this
Yeah.
once you get going, which makes it a lot easier. But there I'm not going to lie, there is a lot of startup at the beginning or a lot of continuous work if you work through it diligently. If you
Yeah.
created one new template each week for the first 3 to 6 months that you have your podcast, by the end of that 6 months, you've probably got all of the content that you need.
Yeah. And for editing too, if you are doing like the bare bones editing, you're basically just putting your intro and outro in. You can cut like, it could take you 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, when you're still putting on YouTube, it's going to take the same amount of time to render video no matter what you do.
Mm-hmm.
So you're probably still looking at like 2 hours of it just loading onto stuff, but you can always work on stuff in between that. So it's not active work time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can work on the social media posts that we've been talking about. And
Hi, Editor Grayson here. Our microphone cut out for some reason at this part, but she was mostly just talking about how you can spend the time while it's rendering, basically just posting all of your posts and working on the bios for your episodes. Anyways, back to the rest of the episode.
so we were talking about the social media posts. A lot of people immediately think Instagram and Facebook, which is fine. Also works for TikTok. Video content is video content. You could also put it up on Twitter if you wanted to, especially for like your quote templates and things like that. Um, YouTube Shorts. We talked about promote it on LinkedIn if you want. Really the social media strategy that I outlined can really work on any platform, but I did want to touch a little bit on Pinterest because Pinterest is actually a huge traffic generator for podcasts. So you can do static images, you can do video images with Pinterest. So you're basically taking the same pieces that you've been doing, the same templates that you've been using. You're just going to put them in a little bit of a different format, spend a couple extra minutes resizing them for the Pinterest shape, then put them up on Pinterest with different descriptions. And that's going to drive people back to your website because you're going to link your RSS feed to your website. And then all of the social media content that you're creating is going to drive back to your website, which is then going to generate additional traffic for your website. That's SEO. And Google's going to go, oh, this is so cool. Everyone's liking this. We're going to share this with more people. So your social media strategy for your podcast is going to be hopefully very similar to what you're already doing for your business, assuming you're also a business owner. And it's just going to be an extension of that, but it really does all work into one piece. So when you get those people back to your website to listen to your episodes, hopefully within that, you're also going to have information in the specific podcast page that gives them, links to some of your free resources and other episodes that they could check out if they really like that one. And it is just a very whole comprehensive strategy. And there is much more that I could talk about, but I won't. But I did just want to note that it could go up on Pinterest. And if this is something that you're interested in learning more about, kind of how to specifically market your podcast, then definitely send me a DM and I'm happy to do another episode doing a deep dive into that piece or just chatting with you one-on-one. So if you want to know how to market your podcast, send me a DM. If you're interested in hiring Grayson to be your podcast manager, highly recommend, but I might be a little bit biased. You can also send me a DM. I have hired him on as an independent contractor through my business. So I'll coordinate all of that on your behalf. And I think that is about all. Hopefully that wasn't as long as it looks like it was while we were recording.
It was actually pretty good.
I think we stayed pretty on topic. I'm proud of us. So thank you guys so much for listening. I hope that you really did learn a lot. I really tried to add a lot of value in here and have Grayson share all of the tech stuff that I don't understand fully, but appreciate him doing for me. And as always, if you have questions, even if you don't want to work with us, but you have questions, send me a DM, drop something in the comments here if you're listening on my website or on Spotify. Make sure you rate us on Spotify or Apple Podcast, and we hope to hear from you soon.
Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Go Get Great. I hope you found some useful tips and tricks that can help you make life and business work together. If what I said resonates with you, please share it on social media and don't forget to tag at Brittany Miller Socials so that I can celebrate you for taking those first steps towards achieving greatness. Remember, success doesn't happen overnight. It takes dedication, hard work, and a lot of spirit. So don't be afraid to dream big and go after what you want. Keep striving for greatness. You get closer with every step forward, no matter how small they may seem. Until next time, go get great.